Hello everybody. Today I want to talk about whether or not George Orwell would have enjoyed Lorde's music. A question perhaps no one has ever asked themselves because it's not important, and yet a question I think about quite often. I love George Orwell, and I really love Lorde's music, so I wanted to know. This video is brought to you by the Great Courses Plus. I will tell you more about them at the end. But for now, let's launch into a way too deep exploration of whether or not I think, this is all just my random opinion, if I think that the values that I take from George Orwell's writing are mirrored in Lorde's lyrics. Ariel, I live in a hologram with you. Materialism. In Keep the Aspidistra Flying, George Orwell explores a character who hates money, hates capitalism, and decides to leave it all together. He writes, "What he realized, and more clearly as time went on, was that money worship has been elevated into a religion. Perhaps it is the only real religion, the only felt religion that is left to us. Money is what God used to be. Good and evil have no meaning any longer except failure and success." So I think that materialism, capitalism, money is an important theme for Orwell, especially in this book. And so looking at Lorde's lyrics, do we have so many examples of her examining materialism. Every song's like gold teeth, grey goose, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room, crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. She's talking about what songs and I would say by extension pop culture is pushing. Like what are the values and the messages that get pushed across through music quite often, especially in the pop music genre? It's excess. It's money, it's things, and it's flashy things. It's things you don't need. She says, skin deep in the fantasies and dreams of the winter like the movies that we watched to pretend it wasn't winter. She talks about how it's a dream. This is all a fantasy land, and we're all aware that it's a fantasy land, but we watch it anyway, and we're dazzled by it. But then what I think is the most important thing, like, yeah, she talks about it, she admits to it, she accepts it, she talks about that a lot, but she also talks about realism. Like, she talks about what people are actually living. Like there's this tiny lyric that I love. Now we're wearing long sleeves and the heating comes on. Like, I love that. Like, it's just, you know what, we're cold, so we're wearing longer sleeves. Like, it's like, normal people can't afford to have the heat on high all of the time. They put a sweater on. They put on socks. Getting pumped up on the little bright things I bought, but I know they'll never own me. She's admitting to playing into the capitalist game, right? Which I think is vital, because if she didn't say that, it would start to all feel quite hypocritical. Something that I think Lorde and Orwell share that's really important to point out is that neither of them are now in the lower classes. Like, regardless of where they started, they're both now well off. As if Orwell was alive. But like, Lorde is Lorde, right? She's at the top of pop status. She's wealthy. We're allowed to say that, it's true. And Orwell had incredible success in his life. He went to Eton. He's fine. And even though he had bouts of poverty, which many of them were chosen poverty so that he could explore and better understand what poverty was, in the end, he was perfectly fine, wealthy, he worked at the BBC, and importantly, he was also famous, and a lot came with that. Not as famous as I wish he was, but regardless. Right, so she's talking about how she is pumped up on the little bright things I bought, not on really expensive, lavish things. You get the feeling that she's like bought a trinket, right? Little bright thing, like it's a trinket or it's a special gift. It's something that keeps you going and makes you happy, but it isn't something you do all of the time, and it isn't something that is expensive. However, the most important part of that phrase, I think, is, but I know they'll never own me. That's fascinating for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is because who is the they, right? It alludes to this us versus them narrative. It alludes to the idea that there is an upper, what's that word? Echelon. Ooh, that's a cool word. I didn't even know I had that in my brain. Echelon. But also, I know they'll never own me. The idea that playing into that capitalist game, that consumerist materialist game, is a type of owning. That you are trapped within it, that you can't be free outside of it, which I think directly links to that Orwell quote I read, that it is success or failure. One of my favorite lyrics from melodrama is, "They'll hang us in the Louvre, down the back, but who cares, still the Louvre." I love that because it's this admission that we have weight and importance in these institutions that don't cater to the lower classes and aren't very diverse, and they're not very inclusive, but they are important. Culturally, they're important. And in getting into those spaces, fighting to become a part of those spaces is important, and it feels worthwhile. And we might not get a good space there. We might not get the best representation. It'll be at the back of the Louvre, but we made it. We're in the Louvre. And again, it's that admission that capitalism is a thing that we're within, which is like ultimately why this character fails, because you can't step out of capitalism and you can't step out of the money system when you live where we live. I think it's a super interesting thing. And then the last one is that I wanted to point out, there's a million. My blood is a flood of rubies, precious stones. It keeps my veins hot. The fires find a home in me. This is really interesting to me because it's this idea of wealth, right? Rubies, precious stones, but they're not for value outside of yourself. Like, they're not important because people can see them. They're not important because you can use them to buy stuff or trade for stuff. It's not like an icon or like a symbol or anything. It's within you. What's within you is what's valuable. What's within you is wealth. So, fascinating. Teeth. So I don't know if you've noticed, but Lorde uses teeth as a metaphor constantly. Throughout Pure Heroine, it comes up so many times. I should count how many times, actually. I haven't sat down to count. But then I thought that, like, that was a thing, that was a motif for Pure Heroine. But then she does it again in melodrama. She loves teeth. In Animal Farm, my favorite novel of George Orwell's, he says, "Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk, he does not lay eggs, he is too weak to pull the plow, he cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits, yet he is lord of all the animals. He sets them to work, he gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself." Now, I think this is really interesting because I think that the way that Lorde is using teeth resonates with this quotation. I think that the use of teeth helps to bring attention to a tension, between work and appearance. There's this quotation from Billboard magazine, right? Was it Billboard? Nope, it was Pop Matters. A journalist called Scott in Toronto says, "She uses teeth and references to types of teeth to signify class, authenticity, and social circle. The narrative focus of Pure Heroine is on setting Lorde apart from cultures and social circles she sees as inauthentic. You know, inauthentic. What are you using your teeth for?" So in Team, she says, ladies out, they're in their finery, 100 jewels on throats, 100 jewels between teeth. This idea that teeth are shining, they're glimmering, and they're perfect. And who has perfect teeth? People that can afford perfect teeth. And who can afford perfect teeth? It's the wealthy. Like, teeth are really expensive. Dentistry is so expensive. The idea that you would just go and casually whiten your teeth is not a luxury that most people can afford, or the idea that you could afford braces, or now like Invisalign. That's not a thing that everyone can afford. So it's again, some people have teeth that are a sign of wealth. In Royals, she says, I cut my teeth on wedding rings in the movies. Fascinating. You know that thing where you like bite on something to check if it's like real? That's the idea, right? She's biting on something, on a diamond ring that's in a movie. It's fake. It's fantasy. So her teeth can tell truth. No better, in the song No Better, she says, I see you happy in the front seat. I see you with all your front teeth. Again, facade. In A World Alone, she says, we're biting our nails. You're biting my lip. I'm biting my tongue. Biting, I think, is like the same thing. Teeth and biting. They go into it. And I think that's really interesting because what is the point of teeth? Practically is for chewing and is for sustenance. But then what does she think that the upper classes or the 1%, or there's so many different ways to put that, right? The bourgeoisie, like how are they all using teeth? For status, for appearance. It's fascinating stuff. And I think that George Orwell would have found it fascinating and compelling, because I think it really aligns with a lot of the stuff that he wrote about. In Animal Farm, for example, like we see this constant use of appearance versus reality, and that's what she's talking about. We have what the pigs say they're doing and what they're actually doing, like what their teeth are for versus what they're using their teeth for. That's interesting. Trust. This is like a shorter point that I wanted to make. I think it's really interesting. Who does Lorde think we should trust, and who does George Orwell think that we should trust? The first and most important one is ourselves. So in 1984, I got my props ready. Being in a minority, even in a minority of one, did not make you mad. There was truth and there was untruth, and if you clung to the truth, even against the whole world, you were not mad. And so if you know the truth, and even if no one else knows the truth, but if you trust yourself, then you're doing it right, right? I think that's the implication. And in Liability, God, what a powerful song. Lorde sings, so I guess I'll go home, into the arms of the girl that I love, the only love I haven't screwed up. She's so hard to please, but she's a forest fire. She's talking about herself. The only real relationship that she can trust is herself. And in Loveless, she sings, I care for myself the way I used to care about you, right? Sometimes people around you betray you. You can't trust in them. I mean, all these books are about who can you trust. You can't trust the government. Is what these both say. But you can trust yourself. And hopefully you can find people that you trust. But sometimes they'll betray you and you need to be able to go back to yourself. Romance. So this was something I thought a lot about when melodrama came out. Because melodrama has so much to do with romance and a relationship that has fallen apart and love. And it challenged my thought on whether or not I thought George Orwell would continue to listen to Lorde, because I was convinced that George Orwell would totally be a Lorde fan. He would love pure heroine, think it was great, but then melodrama would come out and maybe he wouldn't be as interested anymore. And then I listened to it and I started to think, well, actually, George Orwell writes about romance prominently in 1984 and in Keep the Aspidistra Flying. But he writes, if you loved someone, you loved him. And when you had nothing else to give, you still gave him love. And he wrote, if they could make me stop loving you, that would be the real betrayal. It's fascinating because in 1984, like, love for Julia, from Winston to Julia, is this really, it's bizarre. Like, their relationship is super strange. But I think the most important thing about it is that it wasn't assigned. This wasn't his assigned wife. This wasn't an allowed partnership. This is an illegal partnership. And their love and their making love, like having sex, is completely not allowed. But they're doing it anyways. They're loving in each other, and there's power in that. There's strength in that. And the love that Lorde sings about, I think, is similar. She says, in Sober, she sings, "King and queen of the weekend, ain't a pill that could touch our rush." Like, it can't be faked. The dogs agree. It can't be faked, it can't be manufactured, it can't be produced. Like, this is a real love. It is a breakup album, so it's not singing necessarily about powerful, good love, but there are glimmers of it. And in Writer in the Dark, she writes, "I am my mother's child. I'll love you till my breathing stops. I'll love you till you call the cops on me. But in our darkest hours, I stumbled on a secret power. I'll find a way to be without you, babe." Again, it's talking about how powerful love is, how authentic it is, and ultimately, I guess I'm arguing that both George Orwell and Lorde are singing about truth. And in this lyric, she's talking about how this love is truth. It was authentic, it was real, it's unreplaceable, it was a thing that happened and overwhelmed her. But she's also, going back to who can you trust, relearning how to just trust in herself and be okay with that too. The Hunger Games. So I have to mention this because Lorde, being as big of a pop star as she is, has only written an original song for one soundtrack, and that is The Hunger Games, Mockingjay. I don't remember if it's part 1 or 2. And so she writes this song called Yellow Flicker Beat, which directly is for a dystopian fiction. So we're back to 1984. Thank God. Why did we ever leave? In 1984, Orwell writes, "The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power. Pure power." And that's what the Capitol wants in the Hunger Games, right? They just want to control everything. They want everyone to do what they want. They want to be able to manipulate and dictate what everyone does at all times, to the point of being able to use the lower classes for entertainment. Dark. And in Yellow Flicker Beat, and in like a lot of her other songs too, I think, but specifically for this, for Yellow Flicker Beat, she sings, "They used to shout my name, now they whisper it." This idea that someone that was an idol, if the powers that be don't like you anymore, they can squash it down. And now they whisper it because they say it out of fear. And I think about Winston in 1984 secretly writing in his journal. I don't know why I think specifically to that image. I think it's because it's the image of someone who has power but has to use it secretly. She also sings, "I never watched the stars, there's so much down here." She's singing about the Hunger Games. So there's no time for fantasy, there's no time for imagining a better future, there's too much to do on the ground level, which is interesting. I found this quote from Down and Out in Paris and London from George Orwell that says, "The stars are a free show. It doesn't cost anything to use your eyes." Which again, it's kind of different from the lyric. So he is saying that he does get to look at the stars because they're free. And she says that she doesn't have time to look at the stars because there's too much to do down here. But I think actually they're saying the same thing, right? That they live in a version of the world that isn't wealthy, that isn't rich, that isn't glamorized, that is more realistic, that is more desperate. Down and Out in Paris and London is about poverty. Hunger Games is about being oppressed. And they both think about the stars in the context of that reality. In Billboard, now it's time for the Billboard quotation, a writer writes, "She's the closest musical analog to protagonist Katniss Everdeen. Preternaturally wise and idiosyncratic." Not only would they think interestingly about Lorde choosing the Hunger Games, but that they think Lorde is like a Katniss Everdeen of the pop scene. Which I think is really interesting because she never sings about material things. She only ever sings about breaking down those material things, about breaking down who you trust, about realistic depictions of life and of people. To cap it off, I think it's really interesting that Lorde chooses to sing about these things when she could sing about anything. When George Orwell could have written about anything, he chose to try and share truth. So George Orwell wrote, "A scrupulous writer in every sentence that he writes will ask himself at least 4 questions. Thus, what am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clear? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect?" And I think that looking at Lorde's lyrics, she's thinking about all of these same things. I think that they have a similar writing process and a similar drive. And so I think that George Orwell would enjoy Lorde's music. Is it a useless question? Maybe. Is it one I clearly have thought a lot about? Yes. And that's what we should hang on to. Please down in the comments, let me know, what do you think? Tell me like who your favorite musician is and whether or not your favorite author would like them. It's a very specific question, but I want to know. Before we go, let's thank our sponsor, The Great Courses Plus. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video. The Great Courses Plus is a video on-demand subscription service with over 11,000 courses taught by top professors in their fields and by institutions like National Geographic and the Smithsonian. If you're interested in continuing to learn about the wonderful world of George Orwell, they have some really cool courses about George Orwell, my man. And the best part is you can try it for free by clicking the link down in the description or visiting the Great Courses Plus /Ariel. You can try out their service for free. I've been having a lot of fun scrolling through all of the different courses and trying them out. Just try it, it's free and it's really, really cool. It's like podcasts, you know, you can just put it on and absorb information. Thanks again to the Great Courses Plus, and thank you to you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.